The share prices of Australia's big banks soar as investors expect bigger profits from rising interest rates. Is $6 billion worth of gold owned by Australia real? And who is the most believable politician in the region? It's Friday, the 8th of April, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. Who do you think is the region's most believable politician?
Oh, look, I'm going to go with what I suspect would be the popular vote and say Jacinda Ardern.
We'll wait and see then. Maybe, maybe not.
Oh, well, you'll have me listening, that's for sure. I'm very curious. And Sean, immediately after the show, we've got your interview with Simon Kustenmacher from the Demographics Group. Simon is always fascinating. I know you love statistics, but Simon really loves stats. And he puts it in such an interesting way, illustrating kind of what's happening in regional Australia, what's happening in our cities, what it all means for basically the future of Australia, property prices, all of it. Great chat.
It is a great chat. And he also, after the show, he mentions that the census is coming out in the middle of the year. He is so excited. He said he's got 2 years of commentary laid out in front of him already because of the census.
Yeah, if you want to hear an excited demographer, stick around for Simon Kustenmacher.
And who wouldn't? Who wouldn't?
Exactly right. Now, Sean, Australia's major banks, Commonwealth Bank, National Australia Bank, ANZ, Westpac and Macquarie Group as well, are all outperforming on the share market with the potential for higher interest rates really boosting their outlooks.
Yes, Michael, the banks are easily the best performers among the top 20 large caps over the past month. That's the period since the US Federal Reserve started lifting rates, and more recently since the local Reserve Bank hinted at increases in the cash rate. Macquarie Group is up 15% over the past month. That's a really big jump for a really big company. National Australia Bank is 14% higher, and both Commonwealth Bank and Westpac are up 11%. They are the top performing large caps ahead of Fortescue Metals, which also raised 11%, and ANZ, which is up 9%. That compares to the overall market, the ASX 200, which is up just under 6%. The banks have really been doing well. Rising rates should be good for bank earnings because it gives them a chance to stretch their net interest margins. Now, that's the difference between what a bank pays on a deposit and receives on a loan. Already fixed rate loans have risen, as have business lending rates. Variable mortgage rates will jump as soon as the Reserve Bank moves, expected to be in June. That's why investors are buying up the banks. The winners from all this, of course, are the millions of bank shareholders who are receiving a pretty decent capital gain at the moment. They're also benefiting from relatively high dividend yields, with ANZ and Westpac leading the way on that front.
But Sean, I suppose what everyone is probably going to want to know is, can it actually keep going?
Well, as we always say on Fear and Greed, we aren't in the business of providing financial advice. Go speak to an advisor. Having said that, let me tell you some of the risks. It does look good, but there are risks. Outside another major downturn due to another severe outbreak of COVID or an escalation of hostilities in Europe, the main risk is that competition is so hot in the mortgage market that banks can't actually increase their profit margins. Or the banks, which are major employers, can't keep a lid on their costs. So certainly it's not a lay down misere by any stretch that the banks will do well.
Now, Sean, you mentioned Fortescue before, but how do the banks compare to the other miners and, say, some of the retailers?
Well, I suppose we better couch this. Investing is a long game for most, so monthly moves should be seen in that light. But certainly the banks have done really well. The miners had a really strong rally at the beginning of the year with rising energy prices and iron ore and gold prices helping out. But over the past 4 weeks, away from Fortescue at least, the miners have really underperformed. BHP is up 2%, while Rio is up 5%. The energy groups Woodside and Santos, Gold Digger Newcrest and South 32 have all gone backwards. Retailers have done okay. Woolies is up 9%, that's pretty good, and Coles is up about 6%, which is in line with the market. CSL is another good performer. It's jumped 7%, while Telstra, less good, up 4%.
Okay, so what happened in the market yesterday?
It finished down 0.6% to 7,443 points. That's the S&P ASX 200, of course. The tech stocks were hit pretty hard. WiseTech Global finished 6.6% lower. Xero was off 3%, and REA dropped 2%. Energy and consumer discretionary companies didn't do so well. Consumer staples outperformed. Some notables among the larger companies: industrial property company Goodman, Coles and Telstra all did pretty well. Woodside and James Hardie, not so much. Now, there was some good news for fund manager Magellan. We've spoken a lot about this company. News that the amount of outflows from its funds under management has slowed helped investors, and its share price jumped 10% yesterday. This is a group that's share price is down more than 70% since the beginning of the pandemic, in part due to poor performance and a loss of mandates, and also because its CEO Hamish Douglas stepped down for health reasons. On top of that, this week's bid for fund manager Pendal by competitor Perpetual has helped support the share price of other fund managers, just like Magellan. Finally, some good news for Magellan shareholders. And Michael, just quickly, another share price to pop yesterday was Ardent Leisure. Shares in the owner of the Gold Coast theme parks jumped 7% after it announced it had sold its main event business in the US. And I can't leave the markets without mentioning the Aussie dollar. It's back below 75 US cents. Remember 24 hours ago, it was above 76 US cents. Well, talk in the US, the Fed will lift interest rates faster and further than first thought, has helped the greenback but hurt the Aussie dollar.
All right, some big moves there. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, the Federal Energy Minister, Angus Taylor, wants to force owners of coal-fired power stations to give 5 years' notice of closure to help kind of provide more stability, I suppose, to the national electricity market.
That's right. It would extend the current 3.5-year requirement. At issue is reliability of the grid and the push by the big energy companies to close fossil fuel stations. Renewable energy is becoming cheaper, but it still provides a relatively small portion of the total energy needed across the country. Turning off coal-fired power stations really would trigger supply problems pretty quickly. Remember in February, Origin Energy came out and said it would bring forward the closure of its Eraring power station by 7 years to 2025. And then billionaire Mike Cannon-Brookes teamed up with Canadian investor Brookfield. They bid for AGL Energy. Unsuccessful so far, but they also promised to close its remaining coal plants by 2030 if they happen to take over the company. Mr. Taylor said retiring capacity too quickly risked the reliability, affordability and security of the system. It's a very, very tricky line to follow at the moment.
Yeah, it sure is. Now, Sean, we mentioned this one at the start of the show, and I'm really quite curious about it. Canberra is worried about whether the Reserve Bank's holdings of gold in England is real, as in kind of real gold bars.
Yes. Now, many years ago, Michael, when I left high school, my first job was actually at the Reserve Bank. I moved from the country to the city, and within the first couple of weeks, I did an orientation day, and we got to tour the vaults in Martin Place in Sydney. And laid out in front of us was hundreds of millions of dollars worth of gold bars. It was pretty impressive.
Sean, can I just ask you about that visit? Because I have, as soon as you mentioned this being your first job and you're at the Reserve Bank, an image kind of came into my head, and it is a young Sean Aylmer, kind of hair slicked back. I know you don't even wear glasses now, but I'm picturing you with spectacles on then, wearing a brown cardigan and kind of tucking a gold bar, a bit of gold bullion into your cardigan pocket just to take home for later.
Yeah, slipping out.
Yeah. Am I close at all? Have I painted an accurate picture here?
Apart from stealing the gold bar, maybe. They didn't actually let us touch it, which was somewhat disappointing. But I just have this vivid memory of seeing the gold. It's the only time I've really ever seen a gold bar as such.
That is pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. Nowadays, the building in Martin Place doesn't actually store gold, as far as I'm aware. In fact, much of the Reserve Bank's gold reserves, which of course is actually Australia's gold reserves, are in a vault in the Bank of England. Now, this story is about federal LNP Senator Jared Rennick. He's always had a bit of a bee in his bonnet about whether the 80 tonnes of Australian gold in the vaults of the Bank of England are actually real or fake.
Okay, so why? Why wouldn't it be real?
Well, some time back, there was a confidential memo supplied to Parliament saying fake gold bars had been detected in the Bank of England vaults. Now, the upshot of all this is that the Reserve Bank is about to send someone to London to check that the $6 billion worth of gold is there and not fool's gold, Michael.
What a job to be given. Can you just duck over to London and kind of check the gold is real? Surely there's someone that's already in London that could just duck down to the vault and just...
I think Australia sends someone, or the Reserve Bank sends someone over every 5 or 6 years just to check on it.
Just to make sure.
Don't want the English stealing our money.
Oh, you don't trust them. All right, moving on, Sean. Now, Clive Palmer finally appeared at the National Press Club yesterday. Of course, this was delayed after the founder of the United Australia Party caught COVID last month.
Yes, and the interesting news from it, apart from the fact that the ABC didn't cover it, and plenty of speculation about why that was the case, but the interesting news from it was that the United Australia Party will spend more than $70 million in advertising by the end of the election. It's already spent about $31 million. I mean, I'm already tired of those bright yellow ads you see everywhere. And it will spend another $40 million by the time polling occurs in the middle of May. Now, Prime Minister Scott Morrison and Opposition Leader Anthony Albanese, of course, were on the hustings yesterday. There's growing confidence that the election will be called this weekend. Meanwhile, Ogilvy PR is a huge public relations company. It releases a believability index each year. It's a survey of 1,000 voters, and it actually shows this year that Scott Morrison's believability rating has dropped 2 points to 41 points since his 2019 election win. Now, that is much better than Clive Palmer, who's at 29, but it's below Anthony Albanese, who's at 48 points. There's only one person above Mr. Albanese in the survey. Now, you've guessed Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister.
Go on. Did I get it?
You did. Spot on.
Yes.
She's on 68 points. Like, that's 20 points ahead of number 2, which is Anthony Albanese.
That is a huge margin.
Yeah, I'm not sure the Kiwis would agree with this, but this is obviously Australians' view on politicians in the region.
Oh, the grass is always greener though, isn't it, Sean?
It is in New Zealand. It is in New Zealand, literally. After Mr. Albanese, interestingly, is Western Australia Premier Mark McGowan. Now, much of the country may not like him, but certainly there are enough that believe him. Next is former New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian, notwithstanding she was forced to resign and didn't look real good in those ICAC hearings. Joe Biden is about midfield, and the bottom of the rung is Donald Trump.
That is a fascinating survey. That is true. I just love the fact that Gladys Berejiklian, who hasn't been in Parliament now for kind of 6 months or more, is still kind of rating higher than quite a few current politicians.
Including the Prime Minister.
Yeah, that's right. All right, now, Sean, quite a bit of economic news around Australia's international trade balance fell by more than $4 billion last month to its lowest level in a year.
Yes, though we still have a pretty healthy trade balance of plus $7.5 billion for the month, while exports were broadly unchanged. Imports of industrial supplies and fuels surged. Also, the Bureau of Statistics said payroll jobs fell just a touch in the month to mid-March, although that's probably reflective of the floods in Queensland and New South Wales.
And Sean, the COVID numbers remain pretty high.
Sure do. It's a shame that we're still reading out these numbers, but we kind of need to because they are so high. Like Queensland was at 11,000 yesterday, 8,000 in Western Australia, 2,400 in Tasmania, 1,100 in the ACT. New South Wales, of course, which always records the most, was at 22,000 infections, and Victoria was at 12,000.
Okay. Now, yesterday, Sean, we talked about the battle for the IVF group Virtus Holdings, and an 8th offer for the group is expected to land shortly.
Yes, Virtus went into a trading halt yesterday with UK-based CapVest set to make another bid. On Wednesday, BGH Capital offered $8 a share, and CapVest is likely to up its more conditional offer of $8.13 a share. As we mentioned yesterday, the BGH offer has fewer conditions. Now remember, bidding for Virtus started at the end of last year at $7.10 a share. Prior to the bid, it had been trading at just over $5 a share. So the winners in all this, of course, are the shareholders. Because at the end of the day, when this is all said and done, they'll get at least 60% more than what the shares were worth 6 months ago.
Now, Sean, in brief, a few stories to run through quickly. Flooding concerns in New South Wales are rising, with more than 680 requests for SES assistance yesterday in Sydney.
Basically, it's been raining and continues to do so from the central coast of New South Wales to the south coast, which of course includes Sydney. That city has already surpassed its average annual rainfall in just 3 and a bit months. The bad news is that the Weather Bureau expects La Nina, which is dumping all the rain, La Nina to continue through April.
Oh, fantastic news. But, Sean, some actual good news for you. Telstra has moved to stop dodgy SMS messages appearing on your phone. Great.
Yes. Do you get a lot of them?
All the time.
Yeah.
And you never click on them, but you also kind of wonder whether you're going to accidentally click on them just because there's so many of them, and who knows where those links are going to send you and what it's going to mean for your account, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I already pay Telstra for a scam filter, which is designed to stop them. So it has actually improved, but hopefully I'll now get that for free because the telco giant said that it will switch on a new scam filter for everyone, and that filter is designed to prevent those SMS messages appearing.
Yeah, good news. All right, looking overseas now, Sean, what's the latest from Ukraine?
The government of Ukraine said hundreds of civilians have been found dead around the capital of Kyiv and warned residents in the east of the country to get out now ahead of an expected assault from Russia. Meanwhile, the US and Britain announced new sanctions targeting Russia's top banks and President Vladimir Putin's 2 daughters. There are fears that Mr. Putin might hide assets among family members.
French voters go to the polls this weekend, Sean, in an election that President Emmanuel Macron, who's not such a big fan of Scott Morrison, as we talked about last year extensively, he's expected to win.
He is, but pre-election polls suggest a late swing to the far right and away from Mr. Macron's centrist party, and voter turnout is also expected to be quite low. And if he wins, and we won't know immediately because the final result will depend on a runoff between the 2 highest vote getters, Mr. Macron will be the first president in 20 years in France to win a second term in office.
Now, Sean, here is one perhaps a little bit self-indulgent, but one for the humble journalist, which of course includes you and me.
You know you can't buy the media. We all know that. Mm-hmm. But you can provide them with health insurance. Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said his government will channel 25% of its publicity budget into paying health insurance and pensions for poorer journalists. It came after a report shows that violence against the media jumped 85% over the past 3 years in Mexico. Now, it's fair to say Mr. Obrador has had a fractious relationship with the media during his term, but this is sort of an extreme outcome to actually provide them with health insurance and pensions.
I love the fact that doesn't necessarily do anything about the violence against the media, but it might help them recover faster. All right. Now, up next, Sean, is the Fear and Greed daily interview. And we mentioned it earlier. You are speaking with Simon Kustenmacher, the co-founder of the Demographics Group.
Yes, we talk a lot about the latest Bureau of Statistics figures and what they show about population moves in the regions. And he talks about specifically which areas are growing fast, what's happening in the cities, what's happening in CBDs, and where the country's heading to, and where what he thinks governments should do about it. He is such an interesting person, Simon. He knows so much about this stuff.
Yeah, he's always one of our most popular guests anytime he is on. So you'll find it up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Friday, the 8th of April, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and have a go at listening to us as well through your smart speaker. Just say, play the Fear and Greed podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.